Hey, this is Dave with Taboo Customs. This video today, we're not going to be doing rust repair. We're not doing mechanic work. We're actually going to be talking about coatings that we use after we finish a lot of these rust repairs. Now, when customers come in and they have us repair their truck, we typically ask them, what kind of coating do you want? Do you want our standard coating, which is basically, our Eastwood weld through primer, and we use a primer and a finished top coat after that? Or do you want something more advanced? Now, for a lot of those folks who are coming in and spending a lot of the money on their truck, really they probably need to look at doing some of those additional coatings. And we typically offer two main coating options. And those are really partially broken down by cost, obviously. One is, we can do a fluid film type coating that we sell on our website and we apply here. And that is kind of the cheaper coating, but that is something that you have to reapply every so often. And it has certain drawbacks to it, which we will cover those in another video. Today, we're actually going to talk about what we consider our top-notch coating option. And that really has three parts. A big part of that is actually the prep that we will do, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. Then the next parts are actually the products that we use, and we used Eastwood products. We will then do a Eastwood rust converter, and then we'll do Eastwood rust encapsulator plus. Both these products we sell, they're available on our website, so if you choose to go this route, you can go there, support us, that would be great. But you can also obviously purchase them direct from Eastwood as well. Now, whenever we're doing this, though, a big part of what we're doing is actually the prep. For like this Chevy here behind me that we've got here, we actually had about, I think, 12 to 13 hours worth of prep to go in and prepare this. And that doesn't even include really the rust repair that we did. Now, why did we do that? The reason being is that these trucks, like a lot of other trucks, are just covered with scale, rust scale. And we want to make sure we get as much of that off on the outside and on the inside, especially if we're talking like these 07 to 14 Chevys, where a lot of the frames nowadays are not like they were in the past, where they're a one C channel piece that was formed. There are a lot of different pieces coming together, a lot of different plates. So a lot of them rust out on the inside because they get, water and salt in between the plates and just rust out. That's what happens to a lot of these Chevys. So what we're trying to do for our customers is avoid that in the future. Make sure the repairs that we have done will last them for a good long time. So with that, what we're going to do is we'll talk and show you a little bit more about the prep. And then we'll also talk about why we choose the Eastwood rust converter, why we use the rust encapsulator. Then we'll go through the application of both of those products, show you the before, give you some application tips, and show you the after. But first, let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about the prep. All right, for prep, and we'll kind of talk about Chevy specifically, but we use this on a lot of different vehicles. Obviously, we work on more Chevys than anything else. Jeeps are second to the Chevys. Anyway, what we will do is before we go and install any of our rust repair kits, you can see there's a kit here. We've got the whole frame rail almost on the driver's side, a couple of cross members there that are done. Before we do any of these kits, we'll talk to the customer, make sure we understand what their coating process that they're wanting to do, because if we're going to go this route, which is the full-blown coating route, we're going to want to needle scale the whole frame before we do those repairs. The big reason for that is that whenever we're going in, and when I say needle scale, I should explain, this is a needle scaler. Get them fairly cheap, off that website on the internet there. You can buy them all over the place, Harbor Freight and Lowe's, all sorts of places. Anyway, needle scaler, basically all of these needles here, it's just a hammer, and it just hammers those needles against the material, knocks off all the loose rust. But I will warn you, the other good and I guess bad thing is that if there is a weak spot, it will find it, which for us is good because we want the truck to be as good as possible when it leaves here. So for instance, this truck here, we found a couple extra spots up in there, ended up adding another kit to make sure we got those taken care of for the customer, especially before we coated it. Now, after the needle scaling, what you're going to be left with is a lot of stuff on the floor, but also that needle scaling is going to knock off a lot of scale, a lot of flakes on the inside. So we want to get those out. Now, why do we go through this process, and why? And it takes a long time to needle scale a truck like this. A lot of these trucks, if you look at them, they're going to have just flakes, but just attached to the basically layers of rust in there. You don't want to coat over those layers. You want to knock those layers down. You want to get to the base layer. And obviously the base layer is still rusted, but you don't want to coat over that because you're still going to have that rust in between, and it's eventually going to continue to rust, and that's going to pop off. And if you've seen those trucks or vehicles that have been coated, they've got a black, nice black frame, and there's a spot where it's rusted. That's probably because they coated over one of those flakes and just popped off. Now, for the inside, you're obviously going to have a bunch of stuff built up because you're going to knock all that stuff off the inside. When we do our rust repairs, we'll typically end up on Chevys, the underneath usually pretty much gone. If not, we'll typically cut a hole in there wherever we're going to do our caps, and we'll drag as much stuff out of there. We'll take an air gun, we'll blow it out, you want as much stuff out of the frame as possible for this process, because you want the coating to be on the base material and not on that pile of crap that's sitting in the bottom. You don't want that. You want it on the base material, protecting the base material, because if you don't get it on there, you have that pile down there, it's just going to continue rusting on the inside. You're going to coat the top of that pile, not going to do much for you. So that's why, for us, we spend a lot of time going through and doing the prep, almost as important as the products, but obviously the products are very important. So with that, we'll go ahead and we'll move on to talking about the rust converter and its application. All right, as mentioned, Eastwood rust converter is what we use. So what this is it's a product that contains several things, contains some acid, and it combines chemically with the rust to actually convert the rust into something that is basically not rust, but a paintable surface. Gets it ready. Now, you don't want to just use this stuff and then just leave it that. It will eventually just rust again. It will come back, but this is what we use to try to take care of that rust that's going to be underneath our rust encapsulator. Even though, as I understand it, and some people want to argue this, that yeah, this is made to basically go over rust as well and do some of the same things, we want to make sure that we take as much, get rid of as much rust as possible, try to prevent it from coming back as well as we can. So rust converter for us, for this truck, we got 2 quarts basically. Now these do come with a spray gun that goes in it. Now the only thing that I'll say about these spray guns though is that, and we'll show you here in a second, whenever you use this one from Eastwood, it tends to spray in a straight line. I cannot usually get a good fan with those, and I typically want kind of a fan. I want it to spread. I don't necessarily want it to shoot real far. I mean, it'll shoot like 10 feet, unless I'm kind of getting down into some areas. The other thing you're going to want with this is you're also going to want a brush to kind of brush it around, because you'll end up with areas that are built up, and you want to kind of get that smoothed out, because we do want it to dry fairly evenly, and we'll need this stuff to dry before we can do our next step. And it does take 24 to 48 hours, depending on your climate, depending on the humidity, depending on several things, but you want it dry before you do apply your rust encapsulator. So let's go ahead and we'll start spraying some of this, and we'll show you what it looks like initially. Then we'll go ahead and we'll get the back part of this truck sprayed. We'll kind of come back and show you what it looks like after 10-15 minutes. And then, yeah, we'll wait 24 hours, and we'll be back, and you'll be able to see what it looks like before we do our rust encapsulator. Okay, so As far as the application, obviously there's some safety precautions to take. You're dealing with a chemical, does have acid in it. Gloves, safety glasses. Honestly, when we get under it and we're working under it, we'll be wearing a rain jacket as well, because it'll kind of be dripping on us from time to time. One of the things you do have to do, so when you're applying this, you're going to want to apply it pretty liberally, and then, like for us, we'll work around here, we'll apply it. After 20 minutes, come back, put in a second coat. So now what I was talking about with the spray guns, and honestly, you can kind of see that one sprays. I mean, I can spray it from back here. This one we have does a little bit better at, you know, fanning out, but honestly, it's not real great either. That's part of the reason why having a good brush, make sure you get it around to everything, and also getting it in all those cracks and crevices, and just make sure you get a good coat on it. So what we're going to do is we'll go ahead, we'll get this coated here, we'll work around, and then and kind of show you, we'll use this as a, and kind of see what that looks like right now, and then we'll come back, look at the same area after we get it coated, wait about 20 minutes, what it looks like, and then we'll be back again tomorrow once it has 24 hours on it. Well, here we are about 15 minutes later. You kind of see, actually, you know, right now it's a bluish color. When it dries, it'll pretty much be a black, and kind of sort of look like, I mean, in areas that it's pretty thick, you'll tell that it's on there, and it's very black. Now, a couple of things to remember, and you know, I guess I left them unsaid earlier as far as prepping to do this stuff. We cover our floor, and it wasn't this rust converter, but some of the other rust converters we used at the very beginning when we started doing this process. If you let it drip on your concrete, actually will stain that concrete. So we've got tarps that we now lay down. We also obviously cover the truck. You don't want to get this stuff on finished paint. It potentially would harm that finished paint. So make sure you tape off everything. We also, like, since these have, you know, aluminum drive shafts, we actually cover that to not get any on there, and also not to get the rust encapsulator on there. Exhaust we've got removed, shocks we've got removed, wiring harness we've got pulled out and pulled over there. Don't necessarily know that it's real harmful to plastics, don't think it is, but you know, we really don't want to get it on there if we don't have to. You know, we'll also go in there and tape off any connectors that are open, any hoses that are open, any of that, not only for the rust converter, but also for the rust encapsulator when we get to that. So what we'll do now is we're gonna finish coating this truck today. We still gotta go back and put our second coat on this section here. Then we'll be back tomorrow after 24 hours so you can see what it looks like once the rust converter has done its work. All right, we're back after we've allowed the rust converter to cure. It did take just about 2 quarts to do the whole frame. 2 coats, front to back, getting into all the little cracks and crevices as well, and down inside the frame and all that good stuff. Now, one thing I will say is that unfortunately the sprayer that we like using broke about halfway through the first bottle, so we did end up using the Eastwood sprayers. Not too bad. Like I said, you gotta have a brush and spread it around. You can also spray that product out of an HVLP gun. You know, that's something we typically just have grabbed the bottle and just gone to town with the bottle and the sprayer. I think though we might try that HVLP gun, try to see if we can get a better fan on that, get it spread out a little bit more. But happy with the results. You can see it kind of almost gives it an appearance it's already painted, but it's not. It's actually what it looks like whenever it does do its conversion. So now we'll talk a little bit about the rust encapsulator and start showing you the application of it. The rust encapsulator plus, we've already course, mixed stars. You want to make sure you mix it fairly well. Any solids get to the bottom, you want to get all that stuff out. So what we use to spray it is we use an undercoat gun. This is just InoKraft undercoat gun. We'll put a link in the description of this gun. Not a real expensive gun. I think it's like $50. We've used this for a lot of frames now, which you can kind of see the condition is somewhat in, but it still works great. To spray this, we'll have quite a bit more PPE. Well, I guess a little bit more. We will use a mask. I actually got a baklava, and the reason for that is if you get this stuff on your skin, it's tough to get off once it dries. If you catch it when it's still wet, you can get it off. You can wipe it off, obviously, but if it dries on there, you got to scrub and scrub and scrub to get that off. So try to keep it off of my face. So we'll wear glasses, gloves. A lot of times I'll even tape up the gloves between my gloves and my raincoat, just to try to keep it off my wrists as well, because it does kind of get, especially versus the rust converter, this spray is like a paint, so it'll spray quite a ways and it will carry. That's one thing why it's going to be very important to make sure you've got everything taped off, especially like when we're doing this and we're spraying up from underneath. We'll tape off the whole cab or cover the whole cab just like this, because it will spray up there quite a ways, and we try to tape off our arms, obviously your floor. Now this stuff is a little bit thicker than paint, and when we're applying it, we'll apply it pretty heavy, and you only have to do one coat with this stuff, and it applies pretty well. Now, one of the reasons why we started going to Eastwood versus a couple others that we had been using is one of the others we'd used was a good spray. It sprayed well, but when it dried, it was somewhat translucent, so it didn't look as good to our customers. Even though if you looked at it, you could see that it was there, but it was translucent, which just didn't look great. This stuff is not. This will look great once we're done. The finish will be matte black. We'll do the whole frame. We'll possibly, depending on if we have enough, do some of the suspension components and the axles. Typically for a truck like this, and this is a Chevy 1500 extended cab, 1 gallon will be more than enough to do the inside and the outside of the frame. Now, with the gun we buy, and that's part of the reason why we use this gun here, is it comes with a couple of different hoses. We've got this hose here, and we'll show you it here in a second. This will do the inside of the frame, has several holes in the end, basically to make a fan spray. We've got this hose here we don't really use nearly as much. It's basically just a long shoot it straight sort of hose, and then we've got our just regular end for doing the rest of the frame. This process goes, honestly, probably faster than the rust converters because you don't have all the brushing. Like I said, sprays pretty well. Never have any real issues with this. Do want, there is more fumes with this process, so you do want probably definitely a well ventilated area. So if you're doing a small garage or something like that, make sure you figure out a way to try to ventilate it. But what we'll do is we'll go ahead, we'll get all our PPE on, and we'll show you some of the coating. We will start with doing the inside of the frame first, and we do that for a couple of reasons. One, we want to make sure we get as much in there in the frame as possible, because that's really what we want to make sure, because we've got the rust converter outside, but the inside you can't really get the rust converter to very easily. So we want to get that in there, and we don't want to put that at the end, because we don't want to have to worry about how much material we have. If I'm going to end up cracking open another cord or something like that, I'd rather it be when I'm coating the outside, and that's why, like I said, we'll coat the frame, and then we'll kind of start coating some of the other stuff with the leftover that we have, just to use it up. And typically with a gallon, we don't have a problem with that. The other reason why we start with the inside of the frame is that it's a lot cleaner to do that than it would be if we were to go and coat this whole frame and then want to start going in, because when we do the inside of the frame, we'll basically go in every hole and we'll spray. And a lot of times what we'll do is when we're putting this in here, we'll go in there and we'll twist as we're pulling it out. And the reason we do that is that we don't want this hose, a lot of times you stick it in there and it's going to be kind of trapped down to one corner or one area. But we want to basically make sure we move it around, get as much of the inside sprayed as possible. And if it's down in that corner, it's really going to, you know, spray a lot in the corner and maybe some in the other areas. We want to get it all over. So let's get that set up. We'll show you a little bit of spraying it, and then we'll get to spraying the whole thing. All right, we'll show you coating the inside, and we'll go ahead and swap tips, and we'll go ahead and coat the outside of this area, and then we'll do the whole rest of the frame, because if not, it will just make a huge mess trying to go and do this. We already started making a mess. All right, so this spray tip, I don't know if you'll be able to see it. Basically just sprays in a fan motion, fan pattern on the end of that tip. We put it down as far as we can go. Now we'll also use this tip as well, like to get maybe inside of there, inside of these shock brackets, areas that are pretty tight for this tip. And I already hit myself in the face with some. That's great. So once we get this done, we'll go ahead and, as far as this gun, we typically run this tip most of the way out. We want as much product coming out as possible with this. We'll go ahead and swap tips out real quick. And tips are pretty easy to swap out. They screw onto the end, little O-ring. All right. All right, so a few more application tips as we look at the final product. And this has actually been about 2 hours now, so we're dry to the touch after about 2 hours. Now you will have some, you know, it will run a little bit. You'll have some bubbles at the bottom. If you do hit one of those, it's going to probably be wet. Application tips, especially for that spraying on the inside. A couple things, you know, when we go through this, and both the inside and the outside, make sure you have a good process for how you're going to do it. We will start at the rear and we will work our way forward. Typically, like, work on the inside, come out, work on the outside. Whenever we're spraying inside the frame, we'll go in every hole. Doesn't even matter if that hole is on the other side of the frame, you know, or 6 inches away. I mean, if there's a hole like a couple inches away, we may not go in both of those, but what we want to do is, you know, try to hit all angles on the inside of that frame as we're going down through there. Also be aware that on some of these frames, there'll be a hole here, hole on the other side. You can put that tube straight through both of those holes, and then you end up spraying God knows what on the other side. Also, when you're pulling that tube out, you know, try not to spray yourself. Sometimes we pull it out a little bit too fast. We end up spraying some on the outside, and that's typically when we end up getting it on our face or whatnot. So yeah, pretty much just make sure, go down, follow a good process. We do try to avoid spraying on exhaust. We typically will take the exhaust off up to just about the transmission. We typically won't take it off of the manifolds and down. So, you know, depending on what gun you're using, you know, our gun, we can control it pretty well. So we try not to get as much as possible on the exhaust. Bound to probably, if you're not taking it off, get a little bit on there, but shouldn't be an issue with a little bit on there, but you obviously don't want to paint it. That would just be bad. So anyway, this is what it looks like when we're done. Looks pretty good. We will typically let this dry at least 24 hours before we start reassembling the bed and everything, because like I said, even though it's dry to the touch, if you really kind of get into it and get into some of these heavier spots, you are going to end up getting it on you. And trust us, it's not what you want to do. Now, for cleanup, as far as the rust encapsulator, acetone, lacquer thinner, paint thinner, that's what we will use for the cleanup of the guns. Now, if for some reason you got overspray like on these steps here and you wanted to get it off, we'll a lot of times use goof off, and that seems to work pretty well. You probably though want to catch that pretty early, especially if you get on any finished paint or anything. The earlier you can work on taking it off, the better. If it's not fully cured, obviously going to be a lot easier to take it off. So keep that in mind. But yep, so pretty much finish this up. Now we've just got to do some reassembly on this truck. Well, that'll pretty much do it for this spraying on this truck. Remember, you can buy these products on our website, taboocustoms.com. We'll put links in the description of this video. Be sure to also check out our website for rust repair kits, skid plates, other items for Jeeps and trucks. So we thank you for watching. As always, a like and subscribe is greatly appreciated.